and welcome to episode 72 of the Give Me a Crown Knitting, Spinning and Bits and Pieces podcast. Today is Friday the 7th of July 2017 and my name's Nina, also known as Give Me a Crown across the internet. I'm coming to you from the central west of New South Wales in Australia, or central west is a pretty big area, so I think technically I'm in the central tablelands of the central west. So for anyone who happens to know the geography of New South Wales, I'm sort of within about 45 minutes of Bathurst and Orange. It's halfway through the year. Can you believe it? Crazy. But thank you for joining me today to watch this podcast of mine. Thank you if you're coming back again or if you're a new viewer. It's lovely to have your company. We have an Anything Goes knit along going on in the Ravelry group. So if you're finishing up any projects at the moment, then take a look and check out if your projects are eligible. This is my finished object. This is my Rhapsody in Cables jumper that I have been knitting for the past month. It is a pattern by Joji Locatelli and it combines cables and lace and a very odd construction, but it was fun to try it out. I like testing myself and trying new things, so the construction of this was pretty interesting. I won't go into too much detail because it is a paid for pattern, but if you like challenges and interesting constructions, then I definitely recommend it. Last episode I had been talking about being worried about running out of yarn, so it's knit from some Bendigo Woolen Mills luxury 10 ply in the autumn range, and it's the butterscotch colorway, and I had bought 4 balls of it and each ball is 200 grams, so I had 800 grams of yarn. And when I'd finished the front and a little bit of the back and tiny little nubs of the sleeves, I had used up almost half my yarn, and I was getting very worried that I wouldn't have enough to complete the sleeves, that I'd end up with these tiny little sleeves. But I did the maths and figured out that worst case scenario I'd have tiny sleeves, or I could try to hunt down some of the yarn, which would have been a little bit difficult because it was a limited edition. But I did the maths. I sort of figured out how much sort of from here down to the ribbing used up, sort of because the sort of part of the back panel was already done, and I wasn't entirely convinced, but I'd looked at other projects and had seen that they'd managed to do it in the yardage that I had. So I just kept on knitting and hoping. And the back panel has some stockinette sides on it, which I think helped reduce the amount of yarn usage. I have a feeling I've also knit the front panel a couple of inches wider than intended. It is meant to be a loose fit jumper, but I think that I perhaps went just a little bit too far on the front panels, which also meant that the front used up more yarn than was required. And but overall I ended up doing it in well under the 800 grams that I had. So I ended up using 732 grams, which is 1,100 meters or 1,200 yards of, I think it's a worsted weight yarn. Don't quote me on that, but the details are in my projects page on Ravelry. So I had left over the swatch, which I was prepared to break into, and a few small nuggets. But when I weighed everything, the jumper and the leftovers together, I was still about 30 grams short. So I'm not sure where 30 grams has disappeared to. There's possibly one more ball a bit bigger than this somewhere floating around, but I could have knit the sleeves longer, but then I would have had to be sort of undoing the swatch and trying to join up all the yarns. I would have had a lot of yarn tails to weave in. So I decided to go with the length of sleeve that the pattern called for, which is a 3/4 length sleeve. So it works fine. At the moment it's a little bit squished up because I'm sitting down, but I think they're fine. It's a the luxury yarn isn't as soft as what an indie dyed yarn would be. So it doesn't have the drape of an indie dyed yarn because a lot of those bases are a little bit more luxurious than this luxury yarn. So there is a little bit of stiffness at the moment in the jumper, but I think that with wear it will sort of loosen up a bit and go up, sort of sit a bit more freely. At the moment there sort of seems to be these little lumps that are appearing as I bend my arms, and I think that they will sort of reduce with wear and washing. So I took some photos of this in full view yesterday. It was a bit cold and overcast, but I'll try to pop some photos in here so that you can see the full view of it. The front and the back are different, and I I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I did find that alternating skeins when I was changing the yarn balls over was a little bit difficult, but not as difficult as some other strange construction jumpers that I've had. With this particular yarn, I don't find that there's any particular difference when I've used yarn balls from the same dye lot. I think Bendigo Woolen Mills do a pretty spectacular job when it comes to dyeing their yarn, but I did alternate for a few rows in between each yarn ball, and it just gets a little bit fiddly with some of the ways that things are sort of brought together. One thing that I found a little bit difficult with the pattern was that it talks about how far to knit something. So say it's 6 inches or 10 inches or whatever. And what I would love to have seen would have been a number of pattern repeats. So 2 pattern repeats or 4 pattern repeats, because based on the gauge that the pattern was knit for, it should be able to be figured out how many pattern repeats it would be, and I think that would have stopped me from perhaps knitting this front panel too wide if that's what I did. And I'm not saying I did, definitely, because I'm not sure, but it's just a feeling that I got. I was getting gauge, and I haven't done final measurements to sort of check the size, but I was sort of having a look at the photographs in the pattern to sort of count how many of the sort of zigzags were on there, but it can be hard to tell when things aren't sort of laid flat. So I think it would have just helped me, because I get a little bit worried with my measuring sometimes. I used to always under measure. I'd sort of stretch out the fabric a little bit to get to a particular point, which isn't ideal because you end up with a strange sort of shape. But I think I was being over conservative with my measuring, so I think I did go a little bit far, but that's okay. There is also, because part of the knitting is done one way, the other part is done the other way, so there's sort of perpendicular joins to your knitting. So I think with that also, I was doing some maths, figuring out what my gauge was and how many stitches per inch or 4 inches I was supposed to be getting, how far it was telling me to knit, and then counting up my rows just to try to make sure that my joins would join up correctly, because I was joining something with cables and lace onto a stockinette section. So I was worried that I was, without blocking the front, considering it was all on my needles and it's all sort of knit together without sort of true seams, I wanted to make sure that these 2 sections would have the appropriate number of stitches. When it came down time to do the hem for my jumper, I think that that's where I really realized that I possibly have knit this too wide at the front, because the number of stitches to pick up didn't seem to match up with the pattern. I had a lot more stitches than seemed to be necessary, so I sort of did some wrangling, but it all came together fine. I think it looks like it's supposed to, so maybe I did have it right, but I did have a few doubts, but that's not uncommon for me. Uh, when I was picking up for the neckband and the hem, one trick that I do is, for instance, if it says to pick up a certain number of stitches from the back part of the neck to the other side, I put a little marker at the halfway point and I figure out what's half of that amount, and then I try to make sure that I'm getting that amount of stitches picked up in that first half, and then I know to do the same for the second half. So I did, I think I started picking up some stitches here, realized that I wasn't getting the right amount, and then sort of took it back and then started again. On another, I think it was a cardigan that I did once, which had a um, long button band. I ended up counting out, I think, 8 different sections along the button band just to make sure that I was getting an even spacing of picked up stitches. And I think it looks perfectly neat. If I'd have gone all the way around picking up the right amount of stitches, I probably would have ended up with 30 stitches at the end that I couldn't pick up. But in these sorts of cases where nothing then gets joined onto the neckband, it might not matter too much, but it might flare out a bit if you have ended up with a much longer piece of ribbing. I use the 3.25mm high sharps for the ribbing as per the pattern and my gauge, and I found that they were so much sharper than the 4mm high sharps that I was using. So I was a little bit surprised. It did make it a little bit tricky to pick up the stitches for the neckband and the hem, and yeah, I'm not sure. I might need to invest in some just standard hires without the sharps for a few future projects if I need to do that, because I was stabbing myself a bit. The 4mm I didn't have any issues with whatsoever, so I don't know if it's just that the smaller tips make them feel a lot sharper than with the bigger tips. So overall, this jumper took me a month of knitting. It was evening knitting for the most part, and I did take some time off to do work on other projects when the cabling got a little bit much. A few times I felt like my hand was getting a little bit cramped from doing the cables, because there are a lot of cables. So switching on to other projects just sort of let my hands relax and do a different motion for a little while. But to get it done in a month, I'm very happy with that. I think it's going to get a lot of wear. I took it out to the supermarket the other day and already had a compliment. It's the second compliment that I've had in the past couple of weeks going to the supermarket. I was wearing my See You There cardigan and the other week, and a lady stopped me and asked if I'd knit that, and she was telling me a little bit about some knitting that she was doing. And then when I wore this the other day, somebody stopped me and asked if I'd knit it myself, and she was very impressed. So that was really kind of cool. It was nice for these ladies to spot that something may be hand knit, and for them to take the time to ask me about it. I know that I've sometimes watched people from a distance and thought that their knits are pretty good, but I'm not sure if I've ever stopped anyone specifically and asked them about it. So I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, it's an interesting construction. I would definitely recommend the Rhapsody Cables jumper if somebody is looking for a bit of something different. You do need to concentrate. There's a lot of cables, but it's a pretty fun feeling seeing it come together. But just make sure you have enough yarn before you begin so that you don't start panicking. Yeah, so very happy with my new addition. It's cold out here, so it's nice to have something nice, warm and cozy to put on, and I think it's going to work really well in my studio and out and about. On days such as today, it's not quite enough to, I need a jacket over the top, but in autumn and spring it'll be perfect for outdoor wear. But for now, it's good as a layered piece. I have done a tiny little spin, but it's not much. It was just, I bumped into some fibre as I was looking around my fiber stash, and I had gotten this a while ago, and it was just some sort of fiber that wasn't too impressive, and I had hand cutted it into roll lag, so I decided to just try and make it into a little skein. I was practicing my long draw, but it just hasn't turned out very well, and I think that's just due to my fiber prep. So I'm really keen to try to get myself some fiber that's a little bit better prepped to do some practice, because I really want to learn to spin some thicker yarn. But it was something to distract me from cables for a little moment. I've also been working on a few other projects. I have been working on my block socks. So these are some socks for the Miss Click Clack Tricolour Block Sock Knit Along. I'm not too sure when it finishes. I have a feeling that it's either the end of this month or end of next month, but I should have these done in the next couple of weeks. So this is my second sock. So I've got a dark grey, brown, and Ansel Adams, which is a wonderful colour, speckled white, or white with speckled grey on it. So that's my second sock. I've finished off my Eye of Partridge heel, and I'm just working on the gusset decreases for the foot. So this is the second of my socks, and that's the first one. So I'm doing an opposite, and this was a suggestion that somebody made when I'd finished the first sock, to switch out the grey and the brown. So they look similar, but they look a little bit different. So there's just a little bit of variation. So I'm really happy with those. They're my favourite colours, and they've just been a fun, relaxing knit. So I cast these on the 1st of May. I think the knit along started. I've only been knitting on them for a few months, but I'm just taking them slowly, getting a little bit done now and then. But I think that now that I've finished my jumper, I'll have a bit more time to spend on those. I've also cast on a new project, and this is in one of my bags. I love this bag. It's got awesome cats on it. So I don't often... there are thousands of project bag makers out there, and I try not to use fabrics that everyone else is using. But it's impossible to know what everyone else is using, but I try to sort of pick some slightly different fabrics, just to have something a little bit different in my shop. And I've seen a lot of other bag makers use this cat fabric, and I've resisted until now. I just got to the point where I had to have it for myself, so I ordered it, and then also made one. There's one of these in the shop, I think, and I've got a bit more to make another bag or two. But I just love it. I love cats, and this particular cat reminds me of a cat that I had called Moshi, and Moshi was a little black cat that we rescued from the RSPCA, and I don't think she knew she was a cat. She was very grumpy. I mean, I guess some cats are, but she was very grumpy and had a mind of her own. But this just reminds me of Moshi, so I had to have one. Anyway, so in my Moshi bag is this. So I think it was last time I shared that I had spun up some Renanoli fibre, and it looks like this, caked up. And what I decided to knit with it was some mittens. I had thought about knitting socks because it's a merino nylon blend and it would work very well for that, but because it's got blues in it, and my mum loves blues, and my mum loved the fingerless mitts that I knit for her last year, I decided to it doesn't really look like much, does it? But it's going to be a fingerless mitt with a very long ribbing on the finger section so that it can be folded down. So the cuff is long and that can be folded up. So I think it had 50 rows of ribbing or something like that. I will put a small thumb on here, and I'm just trying to figure out how long to knit these because my mum has a shorter hand than I do. So I'll probably go up to about there, and then her fingers should be covered if she has it up, or she can fold it down when she needs access to her fingers. It's a little bit loose on me because I have a particularly skinny wrist for some unknown reason, and I've sort of looked at the photos of the previous ones that I knit her and looked at I wrote down how I knit the previous ones, so I'm just making some adjustments as to the stitch counts, and I think that I'll publish this at some point, which I know I said last time as well, but I'm getting a lot closer now, so I will publish this at some point hopefully in the next month or so. But look at the striping. There is striping. So I'd been wondering whether or not I would get some micro stripes in this yarn, and I'm getting lots of striping. So the stripes tend to go for a few rows, and I've managed to get sort of similar colors grouped together in some sections so it looks like the stripe is actually going across, say, 8 rows, but it's actually 2 or 3 different colors going together. So I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's one of those things where, like self-striping yarn, you just want to keep sort of going and going and seeing what the next color is. But because it's hand spun, I have there's no repetition. It's just constantly random about what's gonna turn up next. But yeah, I'm really happy with how these are going. I'm happy with the way that it's knitting up because because I plied it with a chain ply. I have noticed the little lumps from the chain plying on the yarn. They're a little bit more noticeable than I've ever had with chain plied yarn before, but I've knit, or what I've spun has been a thicker weight yarn, sort of a sport or DK weight yarn, whereas this is a fingering weight yarn. So the little loops where it gets chain plied are a bit more noticeable, but I don't mind at all. I'm really happy with the result, with how it's coming up. So I'm a little bit anxious to see how my color management sort of continued on with the spin. So I'll see what happens when I get the second mitten on the go. And the only downside with doing a self-striping mitten with hand spun is that I'm not going to be able to do any kind of matching for the thumb, but it's only going to be a short thumb, so it's not going to match the stripe sequence in any way, but that's okay. I don't think my mum's going to mind. She's going to enjoy having a warm pair of hand spun and hand knit mitts. I'm thinking about what to cast on next, and after having knit a considerable jumper and a skirt recently, I'm thinking about some other kind of projects, possibly with fingering weight yarn, something softer and sort of perhaps less cables. I've been seeing so many amazing huge shawls recently that I've been wishing that I had something nice and large and interesting to wrap myself up in. But I'm also thinking about a summer top. So I have some yarn for a summer top, but I haven't picked out the pattern for sure yet. So sort of tinkering around with ideas at the moment, but no doubt by next episode I'll have something new cast on. And if you follow me on Instagram, you'll probably see photos of whatever I decide to get on the needles. I have been making some progress on this beanie pattern. So I know that I said that I would have it out quite a few months ago when I knit this, and this was my second iteration of the beanie. but I have my little hang-ups and fears about getting a pattern out there, but I have been working on it. I've been working on the layout of the pattern, and I've just got a few little things to do first. I want to just recast on and just work a bit of the way through the pattern just to double check that it's all looking okay. Uh, I'm not going to get it test knit, and I did have some wonderful offers from people to test knit, but I think in order to get over my fear of publishing a pattern, I'm just going to put it out there for free. So if people enjoy it, that would be wonderful. I really love the way that it has these diamond shapes on there, and it has been my most worn beanie this winter. I think the DK weight yarn, the colors of this particular one are amazing, and I just think it's a really nice cozy hat. It's not too tight, not too loose, just slightly slouchy. So that may be up and available before the next episode. I will no doubt make mention of that on Instagram when I get it out there. But I think other projects, I'm still thinking about doing a hot water bottle cover, and I've got some gift knitting that I want to get started, and yeah, so I'm sure that there'll be some new projects on the go next time. We're halfway through the year. I've been having a bit of a look at my yarn goals that I've put up on my Ravelry profile page. I'm doing okay so far. There's a few that are definitely not going to happen this year. I don't think I'm going to get through a sweater spin, but it's good to have them there to just look back on every now and then and just make sure that I'm making a little bit of progress. I'm not going to get them all done, but that's okay. So that's it for all the crafty chatter. I'll just have a little bit of country life chatter at the end here, so if you're not interested, thank you for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time. But I've just been having little adventures around in the region. I went to Bathurst a few weeks ago, and it was incredibly foggy on the way there. So foggy that I did get a bit scared going down a big hill. Um, I'm not used to driving in fog. I'm not used to driving anyway, as those who have watched before know. I'm a little bit scared of driving, but I'm getting a bit more used to it. But driving through fog was a bit of an experience, going down a big steep hill. But when I got to Bathurst, I thought that I would just go and check out Mount Panorama, which is a racing track, and I've seen people share their photos of the start line, so I just sort of thought I'd go and check out the start line. But once I got there, I realized it's a road, and you can go for a drive around Mount Panorama. So I sort of drove along, and everybody else was going in the opposite direction, so I kind of thought maybe I'm going the wrong way, because there were no markings on the road. But finally I saw a sign which showed that it's a two-way street. So I just kept on driving along very casually, probably at about 20 kilometers an hour on a 60 kilometer per hour road. But it was interesting just to go around the racetrack, and the hills are a lot steeper than they look like on TV. Not that I've really watched that much of Bathurst, but it was fun to do a lap of a racetrack and have a bit of a sing along while I did that, and I think it just relaxed the nerves after the drive that I'd had going there. It's been pretty cold out here. Last weekend at night it was going down to -7 degrees Celsius, so I slept on the couch for a few nights because my bedroom is pretty much as far away from the heater as possible. So I realized that there was no way that I was going to be able to get a good night's sleep in my bedroom, so I slept on the couch near the heater, and I woke up on Saturday morning and I had no running water. So that was a bit of a shock. Thankfully I'd set aside a little bit of water in the kettle, so I was able to boil myself some water and make a coffee and then start to ponder what on earth was going on. I tested a few of the taps inside, no water. Tested the taps outside, no water, but I realized that the hose was frozen onto the tap. So then I started Googling about what to do when your water pipes freeze, and sort of found out it's not too difficult as long as nothing is burst. So I opened up the taps and just waited, and after a few minutes I started to get some running water. So I sort of made sure to check all of the different taps just to get the pressure out of the system. Thankfully they hadn't frozen too much, but the taps outside had little icicles on them once I managed to get the hoses off, and things thankfully went back to normal after that. But I then thought that because the temperatures dropped again on that night, I thought that it was going to happen again the next morning, but thankfully it didn't. So Australian houses, especially the older ones, aren't necessarily built for cold temperatures, so it was a bit of an experience to have frozen water pipes. It's tax time here, so the end of financial year was at the end of June, and now it's time to just get everything together and do the paperwork, and it's also a time for me as a business to plan ahead for the year, have a look back on how the past year went, and set some goals for myself. So it just takes a bit of time, bit of thinking, bit of planning, bit of daydreaming. So there hasn't been quite as much sewing going on while I sort of just take the time to reflect and plan, and it's a fun thing to do, but it's also just a little bit stressful just to have to do it all by myself as a single person business. But it's good. I'm really happy with how the past year went. So I just need to sort of think about how to continue growing my little business. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for joining me and checking out my podcast again, or for the first time. I love to hear from you, whether it's in the comments on YouTube or in the Ravelry group. So feel free to pop by and put some notes in and let me know what you think, or if you have any ideas about things that you think that I should try and knit or spin or crochet. I haven't done any crochet for a while. But I hope that you're well and keeping your hands busy with your knitting and crafting. And I'll see you soon.